Based on Peter Benchley's 1974 novel of the same name, the 1975 film Jaws details the hunt for a man-eating great white shark, stalking beachgoers of a summer resort town, led by the town's chief of police, Martin Brody, played by Roy Scheider. The film was directed by Steven Spielberg, based on a screenplay by Benchley, which was later rewritten during production by both Carl Gottlieb and Hal Sackler, though only Gottlieb was credited for his work. The film is notable for a number of reasons, including that it was the first major motion picture to be shot on the ocean, its iconic minimalist theme music, and the fact that it single-handedly created the idea of a summer blockbuster movie, which, in turn, completely reinvented the film industry, with the main objective of filmmaking now being about high box office returns, off of high-concept premises. Understandably, with the film's phenomenal success, a number of sequels were made. As of October 2021, Jaws has 3, none of which either Spielberg or Benchley were involved with. Unlike most sequels, Jaws 2, released in 1978, was relatively successful, pulling in nearly $210 million off of a $30 million budget. Gottlieb and Sackler again wrote the screenplay, which detailed a very similar story to the first movie, with another shark terrorizing beachgoers, leading Chief Brody to hunt it down. Ultimately, most fans of the franchise consider Jaws 2 to be a respectable sequel to a classic film. Given its success, a third installment for the franchise was all but certain. However, the result would not be so well received. 1983's Jaws 3D was directed by Joe Alves, in his first and, to date, the only feature film he's directed. Prior to Jaws 3D, Alves had worked as a production designer on both preceding Jaws movies, during which he designed 3 mechanical sharks for the first film. Additionally, he worked as a second-unit director on Jaws 2. Story-wise, Jaws 3D follows the Brody children from the previous films at an aquatic park. As the park prepares for opening, a young great white shark infiltrates the property and seemingly attacks and kills the park's employees. Given the premise of an amusement park, this movie had the potential to serve as a predecessor to Jurassic Park. However, due to poor pacing, unimpressive special effects, and the lack of interesting characters, the film serves only as an example of a missed opportunity. At the time of Jaws 3D's production, there was a revival of 3D feature films, particularly in regards to horror movies, such as 1982's Friday the 13th Part 3 and 1983's Amityville 3D. So, it was decided that the film should make use of 3D technology, most of which resulted in unintentionally funny moments. Although the film was a commercial success, Jaws 3D received largely negative reviews. Furthermore, Alves was nominated as the worst director for the 1983 Golden Raspberry Awards. Given the financial success of Jaws 3D, it was followed in 1987 by the fourth and, to date, final film in the Jaws franchise, entitled Jaws: The Revenge, which is only notable for being so bad that it's considered one of the worst movies ever made, and marked the death of the Jaws franchise. Although Jaws 4 was the official end of the franchise, it's fair to say that the third film is where the once potentially great franchise died. Sadly, the franchise could have potentially been saved had they not squandered the potential of the third film by indulging in a cheesy gimmick rather than at least trying to make an interesting film, like they had originally planned for the third Jaws movie. Again, with the financial success of Jaws 2, the third film was all but guaranteed. As for the story, though, there was less certainty about just where to take the franchise. Given that, plot-wise, the second film followed the first almost exactly beat for beat, producers wanted to try something different. Like with Jaws 2, Spielberg had no interest in returning for the third movie. Additionally, star of the first 2 films, Scheider, refused to return. Furthermore, Benchley and Sackler didn't want to return for the third installment either. Gerdon Trueblood is credited for the story for the third film. However, it was Richard Matheson, the screenwriter for Spielberg's 1971 telemovie Duel, who wrote an outline and the original script for the film. Despite his credentials, he was given little creative freedom due to studio interference, which included centering the story around the Brody brothers from the earlier films. Gottlieb and various ghostwriters later revised Matheson's original script. With a number of fundamental creative pieces of the franchise missing, producers from the first 2 films, David Brown and Richard Zanuck, contemplated giving the third film a dramatic shift in genre, from horror to comedy, with the movie serving as a parody of the first 2 films. The project was entitled Jaws 3: People Zero, and was heavily inspired by 1980's Airplane, after its $3 million budget brought in nearly $84 million.
Tell your old man to drag Walton and Lanier up and down the court for 48 minutes.
Following the success of 1978's National Lampoon's Animal House, the slapstick comedy that brought the humor of National Lampoon magazine to the big screen, the film's producer and National Lampoon publisher, Meddy Simmons, was brought in as a producer, while Brown and Zanuck stepped back into executive producer roles. Simmons outlined a story about the production of a Jaws sequel in which the director and the crew themselves are hunted by a vicious great white shark. Brown and Zanuck loved the concept. Simmons then commissioned National Lampoon writers John Hughes and Todd Carroll to write the script. Ultimately, Hughes would go on to become one of the most culture-defining filmmakers of the 1980s, writing and/or directing some of the era's classics, such as National Lampoon's Vacation, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. The first draft was completed in 1979, and, typical of the style that would make Hughes famous, the script was full of both lowbrow and highbrow comedy, including a fourth-wall-breaking opening scene with Benchley getting eaten in a swimming pool by a shark. With the script all but locked, Joe Dante was brought on to direct. Like Hughes, Dante would later go on to direct a number of classic films, including The Howling, Gremlins, Inner Space, and The Burbs. At the time, however, Dante was only known for directing 1978's Piranha, a low-budget Jaws ripoff produced by Grindhouse legend Roger Corman. Despite being a copy, Piranha excelled well above its B-movie expectations, due largely to Dante's direction, so much so that even Spielberg regarded the film as one of his favorite Jaws ripoffs. Admittedly, one thing that worked for Jaws 3D was that they managed to assemble an impressive cast for the film, made up of Dennis Quaid, Bess Armstrong, Louis Gossett Jr., and Leah Thompson. Still, even early in the film's pre-production, Jaws 3 People Zero also managed to put together a decent cast of Bo Derek, Stephen Furst, Mariette Hartley, and Roger Bumpus in the main role, who would later go on to be best known for his voice work on SpongeBob SquarePants as Squidward. Ultimately, although a few $1 million were spent on the pre-production, the project was shut down due to conflicts with Universal Studios, who felt that a parody would have been a mistake because they believed that the script just didn't work, a suggestion that infuriated Simmons. Fittingly, years later, Dante would get to direct a parody sequel to a classic horror film, one that he himself had directed, 1984's Gremlins. For the film's 1990 follow-up, Gremlins 2: The New Batch, Dante went to great efforts to make the film more cartoony than the original, with a movie full of slapstick violence and numerous parodies of classic films. Originally, Dante had been reluctant to do a sequel, as he felt that a sequel to Gremlins was completely unnecessary. After various other directors and ideas for sequels fell through, Dante eventually agreed to make the follow-up after he was assured that he'd have complete creative control over the production. Additionally, he was given a budget triple that of the original film. Dante immediately set out to produce one of the more unconventional studio pictures ever, and he indeed succeeded, as he actively ridiculed both Gremlins and the very idea of sequels in general. Much like Jaws 3 People Zero, The New Batch featured numerous examples of self-aware jokes and sequences.
What if they're eating in an airplane and they cross a time zone? I mean, it's always midnight somewhere.
Although polarizing, a number of critics praised the film for a variety of reasons, including its special effects and performances, especially those of Christopher Lee and John Glover.
I can get you diseases. You'd like that, wouldn't you?
But mostly because of its witty satire, which many critics felt reinvigorated a recycled plot, much like Dante would have presumably done had he been able to direct Hughes' original script for the third installment of the Jaws franchise.